The real, I will say, is the mystery of the speaking body, the mystery of the unconscious. May 15th, 1973. This is where Chapter 10 ends, bringing us more or less to the end of this seminar, the 20th that Lacan has delivered here. Now, we've been messing with this phrase, and I told you there are two basic lessons to be gleaned from this insight. It's a powerful insight. We've got lesson 1 under our belt at this point. You'll recall the title of this one, The Saying Behind the Said. And we offered this in service to one of Lacan's key sayings throughout this period, as well as throughout Seminar 20, that has to do with how sayings are forgotten behind what is said. We're now ready to move into this second lesson, as I see it. It's no less central to Lacan's thought at this point in the early 1970s, and especially here, I believe, at the end of Seminar 20. I call it the one or the other. Let's read it one more time, just because. That quote with which all of this began, arguably one of the key riffs at the end of Seminar 20. The real is the mystery of the speaking body. It is the mystery of the unconscious. Or again, as Bruce translates it, the real, I will say, is the mystery of the speaking body, the mystery of the unconscious. The dilemma here, regardless of whether you like my more literal translation from the French or what Bruce is doing with his, it doesn't matter. The dilemma here is the same. It's the suggestion that the mystery of the speaking body is somehow equivalent to that of the unconscious. They're related, to be sure, but hardly equivalent. Let me tell you what I mean. The real is indeed the mystery of the speaking body, but it's not that of the unconscious. What, then, is the mystery of the unconscious? The same thing it's always been: truth. Truth, not the real. This is the mystery of the unconscious. Again, see l'étourdi, as Lacan says, but also make sure and check out our series on this very difficult text. If the mystery of the speaking body, qua real, is not the mystery of the unconscious, qua true, what then is their relationship? And how might exploring this relationship allow us to make good on Lacan's wager that there's something to be learned about the speaking body from the unknowable unconscious in all its la language? Let's think this one through a bit here at the end of things. Last time, and I don't mean last time for this round of lectures, I mean in the last round of lectures when we're messing with chapters 8 and 9, you heard me say that truth and the unconscious, like feminine enjoyment, have a 3-part structure. Recall this. There's the part of each that can and does show up in the phallic field. The part of each that cannot show up in the phallic field, and the whole to which these parts never quite add up. The structure in each case, whether you're dealing with truth, the unconscious, or feminine enjoyment, is the same. There's the part of each that can and does appear in the phallic field, the part that cannot, and the whole to which these parts never quite add up. Because truth can only ever be half said, there's no such thing as the whole truth to be told. Because some, but not all, unconscious knowledge lends itself to symptomatic saids, it's never fully known or unknown. And because some, but not all feminine enjoyment shows up in the phallic field. Her jouissance is never fully, completely, wholly, singularly anywhere. In truth, the unconscious and feminine enjoyment alike, oneness doesn't exist. All are oneless, as Lacan puts it in chapter 10. And for this precise reason, all are other. The one or the other. If you ask me, this could have been a pretty decent subtitle for Seminar 20, but we got so many of them already in play. I would have called this thing Encore with a space between the N and the C, the one or the other. In the other, Lacan explains, the one is missing. Page 129 is fabulous on this, and I can't resist sharing a passage with you. How then can we situate the function of the other, Lacan asks. And this is an other with a capital O, but probably not as you think it. You have to recall what Lacan's doing here with this capital O other. It's a barred big other, indeed. How, if up to a certain point, what remains of any language when it is written is based simply on knots of the one, knots as in knot tying. Remember, the title of this chapter in the English translation is Rings of String. How, if up to a certain point, what remains of any language when it is written is based simply on knots of the one, are we to posit a difference? For it is clear that the other cannot be added to the one. The other can only be differentiated from it. If there is something by which it participates in the one, it is not by being added. For the other, as I already said, but it is not clear that you heard me, is the one missing. That's why in any relationship of man with a woman, she who is in question, it is from the perspective of the one missing that she must be taken up. I already indicated that to you concerning Don Juan. But of course, there was only one person who noticed, my daughter. Truth, the unconscious, woman, each is a one missing. Now, whether my own daughter will have ears to hear this when the time comes, that remains to be seen. I have confidence she will. Here, again, the truth of these lectures on Lacan wills out. Each is a love letter to my oneless. Notice, getting back to Seminar 20, how Lacan carries this thought right up to the doorstep of that passage we read on the mystery of the speaking body, again on page 131. Notice him sustaining this thought. Man believes he creates. He believes. He creates. He creates woman. In reality, he puts her to work, to the work of the one. And it is in that respect that the other insofar as the articulation of language, that is, the truth, is inscribed therein, the other must be barred. Barred on the basis of what I earlier qualified as the one missing. That is what the signifier of the big barred other means. You heard me talk about what happens when the desirous subject reduces this other to object little a. We see a passion for ignorance in which love becomes a cover for hate. And by love here, you know the kind I'm talking about. The kind we've been talking about in this series. Narcissistic love is a thin veil over the hate that comes with the language of being. This is precisely what you see in masculine enjoyment, which is phallic enjoyment, which consists in reducing partners to parts designed to help a lacking, desirous subject feel whole, exactly as we've been discussing it in this series. And all the more delusionally when this shit occurs in the discourse of the master, which is where the passion for ignorance, if you ask me, is most pronounced. Hate as well. Here, in the passage we just read on the one missing, which is what the signifier of the big barred other means, we see what can happen when we do not reduce our partners to parts, when we do not reduce our other to object little a. What the masculine subject mistakes for an object of desire, the feminine body, as a speaking, not a subject, shows itself to be, in fact, a figure of onelessness instead. Here, at long last, is that scission between object little a and the signifier of the big barred other that Lacan claims to be the aim of his entire teaching and even psychoanalysis itself. It's from page 83. We've been over this, but notice what's happening here. Phallic enjoyment consists in reducing the other, big barred other, to a cause of desire, other confused with objet a. What we see, however, in the feminine body, not as a pile of parts to be consumed by a desirous subject, not even as a subject, in fact, the feminine body as a speaking. What we see instead is a figure of onelessness, a signifier of the fact that the one does not exist. And this, I'm telling you, is exactly what Lacan thinks his teaching is all about at this point in his thought. It's about making sure that big A's aren't confused with little a's, that the signifier of the big barred other, here what he means by the other, is not confused with that little italicized a that we never tire of talking about. A one if ever there was. What then is the one for the other in which the one is always missing? Let's just ask this question. If you're the other in which the one is always missing, what relationship do you have to figments of the one? What's your relation to the one if you're the other in which the one is always missing? What is your relationship to the one if the one is always missing? And can it ever exceed what you are all too often compelled to do in service to the production of this one tied knot at a time? That's the question. What is the one for the other in which the one is always missing beyond what the other is all too often compelled to do in service to the production of the one at the level of the knot? I realize that's a quirky way to put this, but it allows us a very simple answer. Impossible. The one for the other, in which the one is always missing, is impossible. For the other, call it truth, call it unconscious. I wish you'd call it la femme. Oneness is impossible, and thus real. In truth, the unconscious and feminine enjoyment, there is no such thing as the one. Oneness with oneself, oneness with another, oneness with the world, the cosmos, the divine. My friends, none of that shit exists. What the other, qua feminine, teaches us again and again, with every embodied act of speaking, is that the one never stops not writing itself, despite every illusion to the contrary. And that's exactly what Lacan calls it in the final moments of Seminar 20. Oneness is an illusion. So whenever you see something of the one, Yadlin, it exists. There is something of the one. But make no mistake, it's an illusion. It's a fabrication. It's a phantasm. It's a knot tied by the other. Now, it's tempting to add. Don't even tempt me to add. You might be tempted to add, but let's just call this temptation out as best we can. You might be tempted to add, as I am tempted to add here, but not when it comes to the body that speaks. When it comes to the body that speaks, on the contrary, when it comes to the body that speaks, illusions of this sort don't apply. Wrong. That is also incorrect in this context. This is what Lacan calls the mirage-like path, on which we like to envision the being who speaks. It's on page 145, same passage, check it out. When the body speaks, it only ever says what I just told you. I am oneless. You are oneless. We, our world, our cosmos, our gods are all oneless. I am not it. Neither are you, we, them, this, or that. The sexual relationship does not exist. This is what the body says. And this is what we encounter in and as its act of saying. Do you recall the axiom of the said from the start of chapter 11? I told you there's a bumper sticker for this one. The axiom of the said is this: nothing is, if not insofar as it is said that it is. It's from page 137. I'd like to end by suggesting that there is also an axiom of the saying, a saying of sorts to attend all our speaking bodies, yours and mine alike. And you've heard it from me before, because all I'm doing is reading Lacan here again and again and saying the same shit to you again and again. This other axiom, not for the said, but of the saying, it's at the start of chapter 10 instead, and it's plain as day and perfectly in line with the onelessness to which the multiplicities known as truth, the unconscious, and feminine enjoyment all testify. And it goes like this: what I say is what there isn't. This ain't it, might be another way to render this axiom. This embodied act of speaking, no matter how intensely it disrupts conscious and unconscious knowledge alike, is not the sexual relationship. And don't forget, this is why the sense of the real, as indexed by the sensory experience of speaking, is neither nonsense nor, I'm sorry, Alain Badiou, absence either, but instead what Lacan in Ch10-11c calls ab-sex sense. It's the ab-sex sense of a oneness from whom even the speaking body remains apart, away from, ab-sex. Which brings us back to the central task at hand. What kind of real, as Lacan puts it at the start of chapter 10, does the speaking body allow us to access? And don't forget here the etymology of access either. It's less about arriving than approaching. It's about approaching an entrance to the real, not in fact entering it. And that's cooked right into the etymology of the word access in English, which comports precisely with the same word, more or less, in French. It's about approaching the real, not in fact entering it. In the interest of time, and in anticipation of things still to come, to say nothing of lecture series past, I'm going to try and keep this one brief. The kind of real that the speaking body allows us to approach is that which constitutes analytic experience itself. Not just speech, and not just speech addressed to someone else, but what Lacan, in his previous year's seminar, Seminar 19 or worse, defines as an encounter of bodies. Now, you don't probably have this text in front of you, but that's okay. I got mine right here, and I'm happy to read this passage to you from Seminar 19. It's on page 204 of the English translation that we used also in our series on Seminar 19, and it gets us right at the door of the real. When someone comes to see me for the first time in my consulting room, Lacan says, and I punctuate our entry into this business with a few preliminary consultations, what is important is the confrontation of bodies. It's precisely because it starts with this encounter of bodies, that once one enters the analytic discourse, there will be no further question of this. Now, if you're wondering why I'm dipping back into Seminar 19 or worse here in a series on Seminar 20, let me be clear. The eminently contingent encounter with the other, not as subject but as speaking, with which Lacan ends Seminar 20, this is also the same centerpiece that we're talking about here. And those are quotes right from the end of Seminar 20, creating a wormhole straight to that passage in Seminar 19. The eminently contingent encounter with the other, not as subject but as speaking, is an encounter of bodies, just as Lacan puts it when someone enters his consulting room for the first time. Which is why I've been so damned insistent, again, just following Lacan's lead here, on the key function of this eminently contingent encounter that is real in analytic discourse. You see, the analytic discourse is the original Lacanian matheme because it allows us to formulate the impasse known as the real, and in so doing hold a place for it in the consulting room, at the seminar table, in these lectures. And this, indeed, at the pinnacle of these experiences, is the task of the analyst. Never forget this. Your fundamental task, dear analyst, as Lacan sees it at this point in his work, is not to hold a place for desire, but instead to make room for the real. The encounter of bodies that occurs when the analysand speaks and the analyst replies, eliciting another act of speaking from the analysand, is the very bedrock of psychoanalytic theory and technique. It's from this corporal encounter that all meaning emerges, and one meaning most important of all, I'd say, that of the real. Again, recall what Lacan says in Seminar 19 on the basic structural groundwork of analytic discourse. And if you can recall what the analytic discourse looks like when it's written, you'll be able to locate all the parts as he describes it here in this brief passage. After everything I've just set out, Lacan says, concerning jouissance, truth, semblance, and surplus jouissance, there is this support, which is what happens at the level of the body, and from which all meaning emerges, but in a non-constituted form. This is what forms the ground. The ground, Lacan continues, lies here. It is indeed a matter of the body, with its radical meanings on which we have no purchase. The only thing I might add to this is the only thing we've been discussing since the start of this series on Seminar 20. Its title, the proper title of Seminar 20, which may not be apparent when you look at the cover of this book, but it's readily apparent when you read the title Encore aloud. Now there's a homonym for you. Encore without the space sounds exactly like encore with a space. Like those mystics, Lacan included, don't forget, la langue apparently abounds. All the more reason, I'd say, to consider the mystery of the speaking body as it relates to, but also diverges from, that of the unconscious. Because to leave these mysteries unsolved, it seems to me, is not to opt for consciousness, but instead to settle for ignorance, and with it an approach to love of self and other alike that only leads to hate. Last passage. Indeed, the last passage in the book. There, Lacan says at the end of Seminar 20, I'm leaving you. Shall I say, see you next year? You'll notice that I've never ever said that to you. Will I continue next year? Why not stop the encore now? What is truly admirable is that no one ever doubted that I would continue. The fact that I am making this remark nevertheless raises the question. It could, after all, happen that to the encore I add, that's enough. Well, I'll leave it for you to place bets on. There are many who believe they know me, and who think that I find herein an infinite satisfaction. Next to the amount of work it involves, I must say that seems pretty minimal to me. So place your bets. And what will the results be? Will it mean that those who have guessed correctly love me? Well, that is precisely the meaning of what I just enunciated for you today. To know what your partner will do is not proof of love. And that's also where we end things.